to give you a sense of how I come into this work, how I come into genealogy, how I come into ancestor work, how I come into being so passionate about finding Afro-Ancestre, about bringing them visibility and opportunities to be remembered, has everything to do with the fact that they were silenced in my own family tree, that they were made invisible.
Saludos and welcome to the Rematriating Borikén Podcast, where we discuss the journey to the essence of these islands, this archipelago and her surrounding waters, the restoration of our essence before conquest and continued colonialism, the reclamation of our collective healing and liberation. I am Yasmín Hernández, creator of CucubaNación, artist, writer, activist, born and raised in Brooklyn, Rematriating Boriken. So in episode 6, the arrival, I talk about the arrival 10 years ago. I talk about an event that Melanie, Maldonado, Diaz organized in La Playa de Ponce on May 4, 2024, part of the Middle Passage Ceremonies Port Markers project, in which 8 ancestors brought in forcibly as captives from off the coast of Central Africa were brought through the port of Ponce. I talk about the impact of that event as being one of those moments of my arrival. Witnessing that work and also having Melanie work on my lineage has felt like a gift of rematriating my ancestors. It has felt like I could bring my abuela back to Playa de Ponce. To see the connection of so many people to their ancestors feels like an anchoring, which is in essence an arrival of rematriation. But also to connect so many ancestors, when they came, where they came from, where they were taken from, is this way of reigniting that memory, which in essence is rematriating those unknown ancestors to their source. I call this rematriating the ancestors. And I am super excited that we are officially having our first guest, Melanie Maldonado Diaz. This being episode number 8 is also symbolic because of the work that Melanie has brought to the island of Borikén, and specifically part of what we'll be talking about today is her genealogy work and an event in Playa de Ponce with Diogenes Ballester, honoring 8 ancestors who were brought as captives on a ship in 1818. So we will talk about that more, but Melanie, I'm so very excited to have you join this conversation around rematriation, because I'm calling this rematriating the ancestors, which is what I wholeheartedly believe that your work is doing, not just with the work and the incredible events that you've done, but with the very personal genealogy work that you have done on my own maternal lineage. Before any of that, if you could please share, where do you come from? What is your story? What has brought you to this incredible work that you're doing with our ancestors, with our lineage, with our heritage, with connecting us back to who we are and what our essence is?
Thank you for that beautiful introduction. And I too have to say I am so excited to be in this conversation with you, which is ongoing. It's the public just has a moment to hear, kind of get a sneak peek or get a glimpse into some of our ongoing conversations. But it's just such a pleasure always to be in space with you.
Thank you. Likewise.
Wow, it's such a big question and yet so simple. But I get started in genealogy because all of these things come together, and that is as a 3rd generation Boricua, born and raised in Chicago, from parents who were born and raised in Chicago, from grandparents who all met in the diaspora, 2 in Utah, 2 in Chicago, all 4 settling and rooting in Chicago by the early 50s, together as couples. I had an experience that a childhood that marked the rest of my life, and that was I was surrounded by second generation peers and friends and later colleagues, and being a third generation Boricua in diaspora in Chicago meant that my parents grew up hearing Spanish, but and to some degree engaging with other family members in Spanish. But so growing up with parents who didn't have a strength in that language to pass on to me, then I did not learn how to speak Spanish. So my peers who could speak Spanish and were speaking to their first generation parents in Spanish, and then living all of these traditions from Puerto Rico that their parents had brought over, was very different for me. Not having access to that in the same way from my parents, and then they not having access to that necessarily in the same way from their parents. Although they certainly did experience many things that were brought directly from the island, but all of my grandparents, or 3 of 4 my grandparents, made a very conscious decision to speak to their children in English, to speak to their grandchildren in English. So that set me apart and made me feel very inadequate as a Boricua, and different and apart and isolated in many situations, where I didn't really understand all the references. I didn't know the words. I hadn't tried such and such food or ever even heard of it. And it was such, I mean, I can see it now from a much later perspective, that I was already getting a sense for my calling and my purpose in this life, but that's not what it felt like at that time. It felt like a burden. It felt like a shame. And as a teenager, I said, enough is enough. I have power and the power to choose. And I am going to choose, as somebody who feels empowered, to make such decisions for my own future life and future self, that I don't know how. I don't know how I'm going to do it. I don't even know if there's a job to do it. I don't know what that could be for my life. But when I'm a grown up, I'm going to be an expert in Puerto Rican culture, because I'm tired of feeling disenfranchised, feeling disconnected, feeling alienated, marginalized, all the things, feeling disconnected. And so that was a choice I made as a teenager. A few years later, in my early 20s, my grandmother, my beloved abuelita, she died, and died early, in her early 60s. And throughout my life, it told me that she had been searching for her brother. Her mom died when she was just 1.5 years from tuberculosis, and never knew her mom's family, had only met her brother from that they shared a mom, had only met him once or twice in her life. So when she died, and I was 23 when she died, I decided that I would find her brother. It has been now just shy of 33 or 27 years now that I've been doing this work. And it started because I was trying to find my great uncle as a way to honor my grandmother. And my grandmother, somebody who I had grown up hearing things from her about her dad being the first generation born outside of the Canary Islands, and how she had been born in Puerto Tierra and had been raised by her godparents in this haunted mansion. Like, she was the best storyteller, and she had great stories. And then learning other things. Like one time when toward the end of her life, when she was ill, and I went to go visit her, and my grandmother wore lots of powder, lots of white powder all over her face. I did not understand until so much later why I thought it was a generational thing. I thought it was a thing that elderly women did. It was my grandmother, and that's what she did. But at the end of her life, and I went to go visit her one time and saw that the handkerchief that she had on her head had moved back because she was in the bed. And what I saw underneath the handkerchief were these tiny, tiny, tiny coils of hair. And it shocked me because my grandmother was very light skinned and used this white powder, very in abundance, and constantly. And then I knew she wore wigs, and I just again thought that was like an old lady thing. And I don't use that terminology to be ageist, but I'm speaking from the perspective of a child. At the time, those were my thoughts. And so when I saw that, I just had this flood of information that downloaded. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is why I have curly hair. And Papi has pictures from the 70s of having an afro. And my grandfather always, in a very racist way, would tell me, mi familia es taína y mis ancestros son taínos. And ese pelo que tú tienes, pelo negro, ese pelo viene de parte de parte de la familia de tu abuela. And all the things just clicked in place. And I had so many questions. And yet here was my very frail, sickly grandmother, nearing death. And I didn't feel comfortable asking her why, even introducing this idea of passing, like, how did you pass all these years? How is that what this powder's about? What is that what wigs were about? I'm hearing that I have these Afro-descendant ancestors that come from you, that are behind you, and that are make up who you are, and therefore who I am. I need to know who they are. Who are these people who have been hidden from me? Who are these people who have been hidden from me underneath a wig and behind powder? And I just had so many questions, and so that questions that I couldn't ask, didn't feel right asking somebody who clearly had been trying to hide this, had been made to feel ashamed of this. Hearing from my grandfather, who had been her husband at an early point in their lives, say this to me in a degrading way multiple times over the course of my childhood, not really understanding what he meant, not really picking up on it was just kind of, I was more hurt that this person was trying to humiliate me and make me feel embarrassed of something that I loved, which was my curly hair. So when my grandmother died, this simultaneously became aligned again with what I didn't really understand was my purpose at that time, and felt like, again, this burden, like, I have to do this for my grandmother. I have to do this to honor her. And now it's but it was the link, kind of fitting into place. With her death, now I started on my genealogical path, and it was to find my Afro ancestors and to find my great grandmother Catalina, who died in poverty in Viejo San Juan, in Puerto Tierra, actually, from tuberculosis, alienated from her family for socioeconomic reasons, because she, like many others, went to the metro area to try to find work, and began building a family that then she lost through death because of poverty and illness, lack of health resources, and all the other things that disproportionately affect people who live in poverty. And that is what set me on that course, to give you a sense of how I come into this work, how I come into genealogy, how I come into ancestor work, how I come into being so passionate about finding Afro ancestre, about bringing them visibility and opportunities to be remembered, has everything to do with the fact that they were silenced in my own family tree, that they were made invisible in these physical ways, And in other ways that we can discuss more about how the archive works and how the archive silences, and how the archive whitens.
Thank you so very much. I definitely want you to talk about the archives and the whitening, but I want to just pause to say that I really appreciate you contextualizing this whole background with the notions of being powerless and coming into your power, because so many of us that have been or born or raised or have had to go out into the diaspora speak of that powerlessness. Like I describe it as being disconnected from our essence, right? It's hard to know ourselves. It's hard to stand in our power if that is being stripped from us. And it is not something that's unique to over there in the diaspora or the expansive diaspora, which is scattered across the world. It's something that people live right here in the archipelago, in the colonial education system that robs certain histories, that elevates certain ancestors versus others. So I love how you just described taking your power back, but even doing that as a team. That is beautiful. What I wanted to ask before going deeper into that process of the genealogy and the archives is, you also get into Bomba, and I don't know if that happens through Chicago. And if you could trace that for us and how that brings you to the archipelago. O sea, no sé si visitaba con tu familia or if it's you and your own work who finally brings you here as an adult to reconnect.
So my parents, that one grandfather that I mentioned, he lived between the island and Puerto Rico and Chicago. He's actually the one that, and he and that abuelita are the ones that met in Utah. And that's a whole another story of excitement. That, that's exciting for me to tell because it really falls outside of the known narratives about how people settled, where Boricuas settled in the U.S. based diaspora. Bomba, I can tell you that, again, these like pivotal moments. In 2000, I moved back to Chicago after having been gone for about 3 or 4 years, and moved back now in my mid 20s. I'm an adult, and I'm looking, I just graduated my master's. I was looking to get settled back in my community, right on the fringes of, on the border of Humboldt Park and Logan Square, and in Chicago, and was kind of making my way. And literally had just been back for a few weeks, and 3 things happened. And 3 for me is such an important number in my life for different reasons. But 3 things happened. One, I see a college friend and a friend from undergrad who's like, "Oh, I'm part of this group. I know you sing, and there's this group, and I want you to come to a rehearsal. And maybe at a certain point you can join the group if you're interested, if they are open to having you." And I was like, "Oh, I've always heard of Bombay Plena." That's how it had been framed for me and for many Boricuas our entire lives. So I was excited about that opportunity. So I said, "Well, I'm going out of town, but when I get back." And so I was going out of town to attend the Puerto Rican Studies Association conference, which was taking place that year at UMass Amherst. We had set that kind of as, when I get back sometime in October, I'll go attend that with you, or I'll go to the practice with you, the rehearsal for the group. So I go to PRSA conference at UMass Amherst, and in one of the evening activities, one of the we'd had dinner as a reception. So somebody gets on stage with a barril de bomba, and I get so excited. I'm like, "What's about to happen? What is this?" And then one of the professors attending the conference gets on stage next to the drum and starts dancing. And that was, people who have been in the Bomba community for decades will remember as Marie Calabo. But in fact, she's La Doctora Marie Ramos. and Rosado, I think is her second last name. And she's a literature professor at La UPR and Rio Piedras. And she was dancing bomba. And in the 80s had a group called Calabo that was about bomba and resistance. It was an important group. Mm-hmm. It was so exciting just to see bomba, to hear bomba. And the way that it happened was in an academic space with, surrounded by academics. And I knew that, and I had already been telling my mentor at the time, I wanted to, that I had areas of research. And at that time, I was a theater person. One of my undergrads is in theater. And I had really been interested in Puerto Rican theater and did some research on Puerto Rican theater in the diaspora. For me, it was like really important to create resources for the diaspora, for people who, like me, felt very disconnected. So I saw Marie Ramos dance bomba in Amherst, Massachusetts, came back to Chicago, Illinois, went to this practice. Then the very next month, got a job at Aspira Inc. of Illinois, where the person whose position I was replacing, I was there, during the person's transition, that person said to me, "Hey, I don't know if you know this, but our supervisor, he has a bomba group." And I said, "What? He hasn't mentioned that once." And he said, "No, yeah, he has this bomba group. Would you like to come to one of our practices?" And I thought, that's so random. Like, how this person knows nothing about me, doesn't know anything about my life. That the fact that, I was training to do musical theater. My end goal was Broadway, that I have this degree in theater, that I just saw bomba for the first time. And, in Amherst last month. And that now, and I attended a practice of another group. Like, how strange that all my life I was living in Chicago, never even heard of these, that there was a bomba community here, or that there were people, because I wouldn't say there was a community per se before that, but there were groups and there were people who would perform, and that I just never had seen any of these performances or remembered seeing them. And then now I had all of, within having been gone these 4 years, I felt like, wow, my whole world had changed. And now within a span of 2 months, I was going to be at 2 different practices for 2 different groups. So I went with him, and that's, and actually did join that group. The rest is kind of history from there. But that's
what was the name of that group?
The first group that I went to their practice, that group was called Grupo Yuba, or Yuba, which is, as you know, a rhythm within bomba. The other group that I actually ended up joining was a group called Afri-Caribe. And the director of that group, and the founder and director of that group, he was one of the founders and a previous director of that group, Yuba. So, and his name is Tito Rodriguez, my first teacher in bomba in Chicago. And so that was my introduction to bomba. My mom, a few years ago, and she said, "I'm so sad, Melanie. Your whole childhood, you were so committed to theater. You wanted to do theater professionally. You were preparing for that. Everything about your life was theater. And then, you just stopped." And I said, "No, I'm an artist, and I have continued to create." And, but the truth is, what she's really talking about is that when I found bomba, or bomba found me, that became my path. And, when I just knew that was my path. I let go of theater. I wouldn't say I left it altogether. I just, organically kind of left it. I'm a cancer survivor. So in those years, and during my undergrad and grad, I dealt with 2 bouts of cancer, and that itself disconnected me from what was a path in theater. The first time during undergrad, and which made me, have to go through lots of procedures, surgeries, etc. And then when I had a recurrence, I was in a production at the University of Illinois Chicago, written by Paul Carter Harrison, a production called Gorée Crossing that really interrogated and gave some visibility to Gorée Island and how Gorée Island was, how it manifested, how the kind of that ancestral memory manifested itself here in the United States in the Deep South.
Can you please elaborate on that for folks not familiar with that history? And I'm just astonished by all these circles weaved through your journey.
I know that these are the parts of Melanie's life people don't know much about. But gosh, there's so much. So Paul Carter Harrison, I would say he's probably considered one of the fathers of the Black theater movement in the United States. He is a playwright. He was the playwright in residence at that time at Columbia College. He was workshopping this piece, which is an operetta. So an operetta it's in between. Just kind of to quickly give an understanding, it's in between a musical theater and opera. Just to give the most basic, rudimentary, not at all doing it justice, description or example. So it has a lot of music in it, a lot of sung, parts or pieces in the show. He was workshopping that piece, and he was workshopping it, which means that you're trying to work out the kinks, what you might want to refine. So he was workshopping it at our university. I was given the lead role. This is a whole nother conversation about being a brown student in a very white theater department and going from having had all the lead roles in high school to not having a single speaking role until my senior year in college, when they brought outside folks who were not on the university staff, and were perpetuating this very white theater experience. And going to having 2 lead roles then in my senior year from not having had a speaking role at all, but was given the lead role in this, or I say given, I earned that, excuse me, auditioning and earning the lead role in Gorée Crossing. But Gorée is an island off the coast of Senegal, and is part of, and I'll let all the listeners and we can have another conversation maybe at another date about this, but just it's part of the transatlantic slave trade, part of how some of our ancestors, going back to a conversation about ancestors, it was a point of departure and a place from which people were taken by force as captives to the Western world and then sold into slavery as human chattel. But this show was a show about somebody who I was playing the role of a Black mother and a white father in power, a white father. And I can't remember if he was an overseer, if he was like the owner of the plantation. In that role, I was asked actually by the playwright to take that role. He was going to tour it nationally, and he asked me to play that role in the national tour. And then in the process of those rehearsals, I was having difficulty hitting my high notes. And it was because of working with the musical director in that show that he said, you need to be singing opera. And I'm going to give you the name of my teacher. And so he connected me with his teacher, with whom I then started studying opera, who said, Melanie, you have an operatic voice and you need to be singing opera professionally. And so that's a whole nother career path and life path that I did not take and chose not to. But I often think about But back to what we're discussing. It was trying to hit those high notes in Gory Crossing that I couldn't because there was something putting pressure on my vocal cords, which was then this recurrence of cancer and a growth in my neck. So having that second experience, I left that really was why I left theaters. I went off to have surgery and radiation therapy and recover and thought I was going to die and moved away from Chicago, left school, left my job, left all these things because I thought, no, I was in my final days and months. And moved to Florida and then didn't die and wasn't in my last days and got back in school, finished those 2 degrees and then went on to graduate school and finished that degree and then moved back to Chicago. Now kind of a 2-time cancer survivor, ready to get on my path. And that's really what happened there is that when I came back to Chicago, immediately within a month, I was now in Amherst. Seeing Bomba and invited and you've already heard the rest of that.
First, thank you. I have to acknowledge, this gratitude for you sharing this story, you walking this life, you being here doing this work. And I think listening to the story, when you just said what production you were in, it was like, absolutely. Like, I didn't see that as an interruption of your path with musical theater or an interruption of your possible path towards opera that was revealed there. I saw this other side of life brought you to your purpose, which was understanding this history of our ancestors, understanding what would become your path. You started talking about feeling so powerless and not being connected. And one of those expressions of powerlessness is not having a voice. So all of this simultaneously doing opera and then finding that you have this obstruction, that you have this thing in your body that you have to battle against. And through all of this, you're also recapturing your voice, your power, your ancestral voice. Like, this story is epic. This story is not what I was expecting to hear. I knew pieces of it, but I think it's such a beautiful, beautiful, powerful journey to have traveled. And what's also powerful is how you're a storyteller and just brought us right back to a month later. I'm back in Chicago. That's when I discovered Bomba. So when all that is taken away, Bomba is given to me, the way I see it, as medicine. That's what Bomba became. Before you talk about being in, and I know we'll get to the ancestors, but now I'm intrigued with your journey because there's a way they call us. There's a way they awaken this memory in our bones, which we carry in our bones and in our DNA. And I talk about that path with myself with home birth and having these midwife abuelas that you've connected me to. But I wanted to ask you about the role your body played. Because when we talk about rematriation and we talk about being displaced from our original home and our essence, that first homeland is our own body. How does having to stop to work on healing your body bring you on this path to homeland? That's how I see it. I don't know if you feel similarly.
Yeah, it was part of a very pivotal moment for me, actually. And I know you asked me earlier, and I feel like I probably didn't answer that part of a similar question. And that was that grandfather that I go back to, he was between here and Chicago. I came here to visit him when I was a baby, with my parents, and then came back in middle school to visit with my whole family, my parents and siblings. And then as my high school graduation gift, they sent me a plane ticket and I went, I visited, or high school slash, yes, in my high school graduation gift, they sent me a plane ticket to go visit Puerto Rico and visit them in Puerto Rico. And so I visited, and I just knew, like, I'm coming back, and I'm coming back. I will be here. I will be here on my own and frequently. And so my sophomore year of college, so that would have been my freshman year of college. My sophomore year of college, I brought some friends, and that was like our spring break trip. And we stayed in one set of grandparents' house that their house was vacant in Toa. We stayed there, and then we visited my grandfather, who was living in Arecibo at the time. And that was my first trip on my own to Puerto Rico. I planned it. I bought the ticket. I made the arrangements, the hospedaje, like the place where we would be staying. I made all those arrangements, and that was my first time coming back. I continued to come back, when I could, how I could. I was working for an employer. I remember asking him during the interview, what kind of professional development opportunities do you have? And then said, well, conference, and you can go to one conference a year. I said, okay. Well, then I made that conference, a conference that would take place in Puerto Rico that was germane to not only that job, but also to, the path that I intrinsically felt that I was on without being able to really articulate it well. And then it was in the mid 2000s when I was in a doctoral program at Northwestern University, pursuing a PhD in performance studies, that after I was still considered a cancer patient at the time. And even though I say that I survived, I can say that now because it's been so long. But at the time, my particular kind of cancer was not, and how, like, the circumstances under how it was diagnosed and how it had not been, why it had not become aggressive for so long before that. All of these things, and then some other anomalies about detecting it, kept me in this state of being a cancer patient. And then you get kind of released and told you're finally cancer free. And then that's when you become a cancer survivor, kind of just the nomenclature that affects and related to, concrete, their science and, concrete, entre comillas, science that it tries to, address your health more definitively. But I was still a cancer patient in the mid 2000s. And I was in this doctoral program. And during that year, it's a doctoral program at what they call the Harvard of the Midwest, like very rigorous, very intense. And I had some test results that came back as abnormal, precancerous. And when you are battling cancer at that point for over a decade, and you get results that say precancerous, and you've already gone through 2 bouts, it's serious. I mean, it's serious for anybody, but it feels like a death sentence when you are in this limbo, the state of limbo. And that summer, I had applied to, it's difficult for me to take rest. So when I'm given rest, I'm like, okay, what can I do now? What can I do in this time of rest? So, that summer is supposed to be for rest. And I applied for 2 programs instead. One was an African Diaspora Institute at Florida International University in Miami, into which I was accepted. And then the other was an ethnography program with a very famous dance scholar who focuses on tango. And this one was the other one was like a 2-week course. This one was a 6-week course. And I remember it being billed as, come learn ethnography over a summer filled with churrasco, football, and tango. And so, like, who wouldn't want to just go eat, dance, and, have a good time? While you're getting, like, while you're being trained and getting this course credit and whatnot. And so I was also accepted into that program. But then I got these results and I knew that I was in a critical state in terms of my health. And I said, my body needs rest and my body needs to be home. And I decided to go to Puerto Rico for 2 months. I used my summer break between that first year and my second year. I was a 2-year PhD student. And so in that summer, the summer of 2006, I let go of those opportunities to embrace going home, rematriating, taking my body back to the place that felt like was its home. And of course, I worked all summer. I said, I'm going to document Bomba. I'm going to research Bomba. I'm going to use that time, but I'm going to do it at my leisure and, at the pace that feels good for my body. And so that's what I did. And that was a very pivotal summer because I established very important relationships and I got to know the island in a way that was a first time for me. But that really was the summer that changed my life and changed what I was doing in Bomba and where I was doing it. So 2006.
Did it also change your health being here?
I certainly felt rejuvenated. I certainly felt refreshed spiritually. That health issue, was not alleviated that summer, which ultimately was one of the most difficult decisions I've had to make in my life. Just after completing 2 years of coursework to decide to leave my program for the sake of my health. But I said, I went in doing this work already. I've continued to do it while I'm here and I will continue to do it. This is what I'm meant to do. I won't have the piece of paper that will open certain doors to funding and job possibilities. And maybe I will not be a researcher at a research institution as I'd hoped, but I am a researcher and I will continue with that work. So being there that first, that summer for that length of time didn't change that particular health issue. But I can say from a spiritual perspective, it certainly bound me to that land and in a way, bound me spiritually to the work in a new way. And has been the place that I go to because of my work, but because I know I need to be there and because I know that that's what my spirit needs for health, to feel well, to feel like I am connected and doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So being there is always about being aligned and being where I'm supposed to be doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Thank you so much for just sharing these very intimate parts of their journey. How, you opened up with your abuela and this commitment to find her brother. How does this all lead you to the actual research of ancestors and the archives and all of this?
Well, at that time, internet was still a novelty, not very accessible to people. I mean, I had access to it because, that was the, before really the age of dial-up in the 90s. You used to have to, I started by reading books and trying to understand, all right, the little information I have, I know that they live in Puerto Tierra. What can I learn about Puerto Tierra? Because it felt daunting. It felt like it was a lifelong mission. And little did I know, really that kind of work was part of my mission and that he was like maybe the gatekeeper to that and that, he opened that. But it really wasn't even actually until just this year, I think. This year, 2024, when I believe it was this year. If not, it was maybe at the end of last year, but I think it was this year that I actually finally found him. and could confirm, because he had such a common last name that I couldn't confirm whether I'd found him, because I found so many people with his, his name and age, so many people that it was just, I didn't have enough information to confirm. But in that search for him, I learned so many things. I learned about how to order records from the federal government. I learned pre database, all of these wonderful digital databases that are now available. But previous to that, you would have to kind of take a shot in the dark, order a document for the federal government, a census document or some kind of Social Security record. You couldn't order a census document, excuse me. A Social Security record in particular was what I was looking for. And you would have to hope and pray that the information on there was what you were seeking. Now a lot of these things have been scanned and they're on the internet, but it was a very slow process. And then when those databases became available, then I said, okay, I've been looking for him, and and rellenando el árbol mío, poco a poco, not really with a purpose to do that, but really looking for him. But then I thought, wow, I have developed all of these tools and understanding of how to use these resources to find people, because I've so exhaustively looked for him. Déjame ver lo que puedo encontrar sobre X personas. I was already doing bomba research, trying to understand. I was interviewing people. I said, let me see if they keep telling me about their parents, their teachers, their elders. Let me see if I can find some of these elders. Like, just who were they? And that for me is like a very theater thing for me to do, because it's, from a theater perspective, it's character development. Like, you do a lot of research as an actor, as an actress, to understand the kind of person or the particular person that you're playing the character. And so you, and there are just whole approaches dedicated to that and methodologies. But I thought, this is what I'm going to do. And even when you may have heard me say I have, a couple undergrads. Well, my second undergrad is psychology. Why? Because I wanted to be better at character development. I wanted to understand how minds work, how people work, thought processes, so that when I was portraying a character, I would be able to do it well. And so going back in the early 2000s, when I'm like, oh, I should look up some of these names that I keep hearing, who was La Ponchinela? Who are these people that I keep hearing about that were elders, 100 years ago, and whose legacy we are, at that point, maybe 75 years ago, whose legacies we continue to uphold. Who were these people? And so I started looking for them. And then I said, oh, wow, it's so interesting. Like, now I'm really curious. Like, I'm seeing details in these records that, like, tell me about their intimate lives. Like, wow, Pablo Lin was a baker. Like, Pablo Lin, when I started in Bomba in 2000, he was the name. He was the drummer that I would hear about, who was the best drummer of the 1900s in the whole island. And he was from from Arroyo, which in previous centuries had been part of the region of Guayana. But he was this drummer from Arroyo. Like, okay, he was a baker. Oh, wait, he was a baker. Bakers wear pañuelos around their neck. Pañuelos, I always wondered why in traditional bomba, men wore pañuelos around their neck. Like, what does that have anything to do with? I always ask that question. What does that have? Tell me about this bomba costume for men. Like, what is this pañuelo around the neck about? Figuring out that when Pablo Lin was alive, he was a mentor to the creators of the bomba costume. It makes sense that maybe that was an homage, possibly that was an homage to their teacher, just in visibilizing him in this way. And why? Because he was a baker.
Again, these circles of your journey, there are times, as your mother said, you couldn't finish this, or you weren't able to realize this musical theater thing. Sometimes we have an interruption or disruption in our path that we think may signal a failure in some way, or this unrequited passion that we couldn't realize. And yet, in your preparation for musical theater, and I kind of see this as, this pañuelo, this baker's pañuelo that becomes a fixture in Bomba. But all of the things that you were doing, from developing your skills, your education, your research capacity for character development to be able to better play these characters, ironically, are all things that, unbeknownst to you perhaps, were preparing you to become a better genealogist, preparing you to become a better researcher of Bomba, which in essence leads and carves the path for you, connecting Puerto Rico to its African roots deeper, in a deeper way, right? Porque nosotros sabemos las tradiciones, conocemos quizás los nombres of these ancestors, but then you bring in this other skill where you're able, as you said, rellenando el árbol, filling in the blanks of that family tree. But what you're doing for us is filling in the blanks of our ancestors, those details that we did not know. This is, I think, the gift that you bring to folks with your work.
It really was function. He learned in his day job, in his, his occupation or his vocation, that he was, this was functional. This would catch the sweat. And, in Puerto Rico, in Abate, you're drumming there for hours, you're dancing, you're singing, all these things. And he was known as a dancer and a drummer. You sweat. And he had a tool that he was able to bring now to this space. Like, oh, I know how to remedy that for myself. And here's what I can do. And then now that I see as a researcher now, critically looking at just Bomba in general and trying to make connect, like things that people couldn't explain to me. Why this? Why that? Why do we do that? Why? Because it was traditional that men dance with pañuelos in their hand, but around the neck, tied that way. No, is it possible that this is just an homage, an actual homage to a teacher, an elder in the community, an important person to the practice? And so genealogy helped me in that way to make connections. Like, okay, wait, why do I find this person here and then I find them over there? Oh, okay. Why? What is this that he's working over here? Like, he's so far away from his partner. What is that? Then I go back to the partner's family and like, I'm not sure if this is the same person, but I just found this person, the next town over, but pretty far away. Oh yeah, that's because that's the colonia, and the colonias were basically Puerto Rico's version of a company town. And the centrales azucareras, they would create these colonias, and their workers would live in the colonia. It's a very strange word to use, considering the island is a colony. But these American sugar corporations, and not just them, but these large sugar corporations would create a company town. And workers would live there, and they would use riles, which were like company money. You could use the rile at the company store. There's a song, con los riles. There's a song that mentions this company money. And so learning about, make the person saying, oh yeah, so-and-so, I remember he used to work for such and such sugar corporation. So it makes sense. And then I'd say, oh my gosh. So genealogy has all of these ways of amplifying memory, filling in the gaps in memory, connecting memory, explaining memory, that for me helped. Like that's what a colonia is. It's a company town. Okay. Oh, colonias have riles. Oh my gosh, we have a bomba song about riles. That's what they're talking about. They're talking about an experience of living at a central. That's what that's about. So genealogy has just helped me so much in understanding things about bomba, understanding things about the practice, understanding how everyday life is reflected in these songs, how the songs themselves is this like song archive that holds ancestral memory that has been passed down. And that when we create new songs, because we don't want to keep singing the same songs over and over again, what we're actually doing in refusing to sing those older songs is we're erasing that song archive. And so all of these things for me interplay, they're interconnected. As the songs for me, I try as much as possible, because we're working on some written pieces, and that piece has a bomba song in it. For me, it's an archive that I always try to cite is our bomba songs.
Thank you so much for listening to this first half of my conversation with Melanie Maldonado Diaz of Propa. For more information about Propa, you can find Propa on Facebook, and you can also find Propa on Instagram with the handle at Cultura Boricua, Borikua. So K instead of C on the Boricua. I am Yasmín Hernández of the Rematriating Borikén Podcast. More info on Rematriating Borikén can be found at our Facebook and Instagram pages and at Rematriating Borikén, BORIKEN.com. Stay tuned for part 2 of our conversation on Melanie's work with the ancestors and with Boricua genealogy.